Good evening and welcome everyone to the Brisbane City Council meeting of April 6, 2017. Let's call the meeting to order, and if you would please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Please note for the record that all council members are present.
Okay, item 3, adoption of agenda.
Move adoption.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Item 4, public hearing. Tonight we have the Brisbane Baylands planning applications, Baylands concept plans, Brisbane Baylands specific plan, case SP-01-06, general plan amendment, cases GP-01-06, GP-01-10, and related final environmental impact report. The specific topics include economics, development feasibility, municipal cost or revenue, and related policy issues. Universal Paragon Corporation applicant. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'd like to turn the presentation over this evening to our representatives, city representatives from Kaiser Marston. That'd be Tim Kelly and Debbie Kern. They prepared the various technical studies related to economic and fiscal impact. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Debbie and Tim.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and the members of the council. I'm Debbie Kern with Kaiser Marston Associates. Excuse me. And I'm here tonight to discuss the preliminary findings of our fiscal impact analysis of the Baylands project. The purpose of our evaluation, there were two primary purposes. And the first was to determine whether or not that the conceptual plans are in compliance with the city's policy that all new development must pay for itself. And what we mean by pay for itself is that the anticipated tax revenues that would be annually generated by the project would be sufficient to fund the project's need for municipal services. The city put this policy in place to ensure that any new development would not generate a burden to the city's current residents or financial resources. In effect, that any new development would by itself be in isolation pay for itself. So that was the first purpose. And the second was to identify potential measures that the city could possibly employ here with the developer to enhance the fiscal surplus from the property so that it would benefit the city fiscally, not just be fiscally neutral. The impacts that we analyzed are the impacts on the city's general fund, the gas tax fund, Measure A fund, and those are the primary funds. And the reason for those funds is that those are the funds that are used to fund this bulk of city services. So we looked at the revenues that are going into those funds and then the expenditures that are funded by those funds. We examined the impacts of 4 development proposals that are analyzed in the EIR, 2 of the developer-sponsored plans, and then 2 of the community plans. This slide just summarizes the development scenarios under each of these plans, and as you can see, the developer plan has 4,400 residential units and approximately 7 million square feet of non-residential space. The community plans are lesser intensity of development for the site, and there's no residential, and there is non-residential ranging from 7.7 to 7.8 million square feet. The analysis is based on a number of key assumptions, and the first assumption is that we have assumed that each development concept, as it's laid out in the EIR, is supported by the marketplace. It's financially feasible, which means that a private development entity would go out and build this project, each of these projects, and that it would achieve full build-out. So that's an assumption. We didn't look at how long each one would take to absorb in the marketplace. It assumed that each one is financially feasible. Another key assumption that impacts the costs of the analysis is that we've assumed that all of the infrastructure would be publicly owned and that it would be maintained by the City of Brisbane's general fund or the gas tax fund. So this provides you with an understanding of the envelope of costs that we're talking about for maintaining this project. Another key driver is the assessed valuation for the residential component, and the analysis assumes an average value of $1 million for the townhomes and $643,000 per unit for the apartments and condominiums, and those are consistent actually with the prices for new product that's being built out even in Hunters Point, and it's consistent with the resale values for some homes in Brisbane as of last year when this data was collected. So we feel comfortable with that. And we have another assumption is that upon full build out that there are some existing businesses on the property that would have to be relocated or would be closed at that point in time. And the analysis assumes that they'd be closed. And with the closure, it would reduce revenues to the city of about $810,000 per year. So those revenues have been deducted from the projected impacts of each concept. The preliminary findings of our analysis for each of the 4 plans, and this slide just really shows 2 because there's kind of the bookends. It shows the developer sponsor plan and the CPP variant. The analysis indicates that all 4 of these concepts would generate a fiscal surplus to the city upon full build out. So conceptually, each one of them meets that test of that they would pay for themselves. So that's just an indicator to you that of the impacts of each project. This slide just provides some more background about the key revenue sources for each of these plans. And for the developer sponsor plan, property taxes are the single largest source of revenue to the city, generating about 57% of the tax base that would be generated by the project. The second largest source of revenue is sales and use tax, which are sales tax generated by the residents when they purchase retail goods throughout the city. And then another key source is the transient occupancy tax revenues, which are the hotel taxes from the hotel component. For the community plan, the largest single source of revenue is the TOT, and that's because that plan has 1,500 hotel rooms, and the city collects a tax of 12% on the hotel sales. So that's the key driver of the revenues from that scenario. Property tax is the second largest source of 27%. In terms of the key components of service costs under all of the plans, providing fire and emergency medical services is the largest cost component. Well, actually, the CPP, I guess it's the police. And these costs are based upon an average cost approach. When you take the city's current budget for fire and EMS, for example, you divide it by the population or the service population, and then we've just applied that to the projected service population for the project. So I think these are overstated probably, and they could be through additional examination and figuring out exactly how many more fire stations, if you would need another fire station to serve this project, for example, it could be reduced. I think these costs could be moved down. Another major source of costs are public works costs, and that's the cost of maintaining roads, maintaining parks, and that's another key component that we can talk about, that in large projects today, typically a large piece of the public works costs are funded privately through you establish a special tax on property owners, and that is shifted then from the general fund to the private sector. So you can see if you were to, I think the roads here alone are about $1 million a year. So if that was shifted to the private sector, then that would enhance the bottom line by $1 million. Yeah. So we started talking about this, the mechanisms to enhance fiscal benefits. What do people do? What do cities do to enhance the fiscal revenues from a project? One of the key mechanisms is establishing a special tax district called a CFD. It's also called a Mello-Roos district for services. A CFD can be used for both funding infrastructure costs as well as funding ongoing municipal services. And that is being used by large developments throughout California, including Bay Meadows, for example, nearby. I'm working on Treasure Island right now, and that's a key source of funding costs there as well. Another tool that is standard and widely used is that if you negotiate a development agreement, that the development agreement requires that prior to embarking on any phase, to getting building permits for any phase, then a fiscal analysis would be done of that phase, and the fiscal analysis would have to demonstrate that that phase will generate a fiscal surplus to the city. Another tool that might be useful here, because you have businesses on site that are generating significant tax revenues, is trying to relocate that business either on site or elsewhere within the city to keep those revenues in place while the project is being built out, because this is a long-term project. Another tool is to capture use tax revenue, which is business-to-business revenue. And for example, when this project is constructed, the purchase of construction materials will generate a very large amount of tax revenue, and it'll be important for the city to be designated as the point of sale for that tax revenue. And another tool that cities use are adopting new taxes, and they don't necessarily have to apply to a broad types of users. For example, an admissions tax on entertainment uses would be targeted towards people that attend ball games or arena facility or concerts and things like that. So that can be an effective source of revenue. We were also asked to identify financing tools that are being used to fund infrastructure improvements, because this property obviously has huge infrastructure costs and brownfield costs. The tools, again, that are being used widely for projects like this that have large infrastructure needs one is establishing a special tax or an assessment district on the property. And that is a lien on the property, and it is an additional tax on the property owners, and that tax is used to fund infrastructure improvements. And that's being used in all the new projects that we're working on. Another source is tax increment financing, which is a new iteration. It's not redevelopment, but it's tools that have come that have been formed because of the demise of redevelopment. The one that's being talked about most is called an Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, or an EIFD. And what that is, it's similar to redevelopment in that it is a diversion of a portion of property tax increment to this district, and you dedicate it for funding infrastructure. But it's very different from redevelopment, because redevelopment, the diversion was by statute. It was mandatory. All the taxing entities had to participate, and their tax increment was put into the district. Under an EIFD, it's all voluntary. So each taxing entity that participates has to voluntarily do so, and school districts are prohibited from participating. So the net effect of that is that the amount of revenue that can be raised is much less than redevelopment. For example, the city of Brisbane in this property collects about 18% of each tax dollar, property tax dollar, and under redevelopment, the diversion was about 80%, 80 cents of the dollar compared to 18 cents of the dollar. So for it to be an effective tool here, one mechanism would be for the county to possibly participate with the city, because this is such a regional site and has a regional impact and can provide regional benefits, that if the county were to participate and share a portion of its taxes, property taxes, and the city share a portion of its taxes, the amount that you would share or deposit would be informed by this fiscal analysis, because you want to, every time you divert dollars from the general fund, then those are dollars that can't be used for municipal services. So it's important when you adopt these, in fact, but you're obligated, you have to prepare a fiscal analysis and that shows the impacts of the diversion to the district, what happens to your municipal service situation. But that's something that cities are looking at. It's been adopted by San Francisco in a number of times, but they're in a unique position because city and county, they collect 65 cents of the dollar. So the amount that they raise is much higher, obviously, than most cities. Other tools are the providing fee credits for impact fees. So when a developer provides infrastructure, they get a credit for their impact fees that would otherwise be due. Another is just really by the design of the project itself, through the value that you create by cobbling together these, the land uses that enhance the value of the property. The higher the value of the property, the more that it can bear of infrastructure costs. So that's called upzoning, or another thing is providing some cost savings through maybe changing the parking requirements of having, you have some reduced parking when you have mixed uses that can share parking, for example. Other tools include tax sharing, where some cities provide a portion of they rebate a portion of the sales tax, for example, or TOT to the developer, and again, that can then be funneled back to funding infrastructure or other public benefits. And then the last are federal and state programs, and those are grants that can be applied for and to help fund the infrastructure improvements. So with that, I can either turn it over to Tim right now or answer questions now, or whatever, however you would like.
Does anyone have any questions at this point?
I'm going to wait until after public comment.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just
Right.
There you go.
Is it this one?
The right one.
Okay. Have to get technically.
Can you raise the mic a little bit?
Have to have
Thank
technical assistance here. Good evening. I'm Tim Kelly with Kaiser Marston Associates. Just to summarize, Debbie just did the fiscal impact analysis, and I'm making comments on the private feasibility analysis of developing. So Debbie's was on the city side, and I'm doing the private sector side. The analysis we have done is a very conceptual analysis, and the reason is the project's very conceptual at this point. So these comments are really on a qualitative basis. They're at a high level, the macro analysis. But to illustrate our point, there are some numbers in here. They're quantitative numbers. They came from UPC, from their technical consultants. They're used to illustrate how decision-makings are influenced by certain costs and how the project might proceed. And as better information comes in, the analysis will change over time. And as we all know, this is a pretty dynamic process, so undoubtedly a year from now the numbers will be different. Essentially, feasibility at a really high level, just to state the obvious, revenues have to exceed costs. I mean, pretty straightforward. There are lots of ways to measure that. I mean, and there are a lot of variables. Just a simple basic test that we used was that the land value had to be greater than the cost to create a developable site, which basically means you're taking the site, you grade it. In this case, you have a land closure for the landfill, remediation, that type of thing. We didn't count. I'm getting ahead of myself a bit here. Yeah. So that test is sort of a minimum threshold for proceeding. Obviously, the site is influenced in terms of value from the market. The Bay Area economy, I'm stating things you already know. I mean, the Bay Area is extremely strong. The job creation is strong. Demand for housing is strong. The location is a tremendous location. And obviously, it's in the peninsula. It's probably the largest site in the peninsula that's available. You have the proximity to SFO, to jobs, to Caltrain, regional access, and it has a high visibility from 101. So there are a lot of factors here that are very positive for the site, and it creates a lot of opportunities. And I think from a market perspective, it's a unique site in the market. However, it's also got to function in a competitive environment. There are economic cycles, both nationally and locally, and it has to make sense for the private sector to do this. So what we did as this basic simple test is we looked at what we call site development costs. In other words, land values should be above, land values supported by development should be greater than the site development costs. And so we just focused on infrastructure costs. As I said earlier, this is landfill, remediation, that type of thing. We did not account, in this little exercise, we just did not count some other costs. An example of that is their historic land costs, pre-development costs, CEQA costs. So this is just numbers that came from their technical support on site development costs. Okay, so those numbers, the numbers for site development costs are approximately, well, the number has changed, but at the time we did this, it was about $1.1 billion. It might even be higher right now. Again, these costs were prepared by technical. Many of the costs appear to be fixed. In other words, it makes no difference which land use you put on it. I mean, whether it's residential or commercial, you have to do these costs. You got to close the landfill. You have to do remediation. It is not completely clear how it could be phased, but presumably there's some phasing in here. But it might be difficult to phase. For example, the land closure itself is a very big number, well in excess of $100 million. And so some of these numbers need to be funded up front. And like I said, it's independent of the land use. But in terms of phasing, it's a big project. So trying to do, what the implication is trying to do a series of 5-acre parcels is probably not going to make a lot of sense. You're going to have to do probably something on the scale of 40, 30, 40, 50 acre phases at a minimum at a time to justify the costs that have to be incurred. So in terms of feasibility, you look at what the income producing asset is for the private sector, and the gross area is 640 acres. After you take out open space, roads, solar farm, let's say the solar farm is not a high land value use, you take out those, you have 300 net developable acres. So that's your income producing asset, from at least from a real estate side. That's the asset that you're going to use to pay for everything else and try to create land value on the 300 net developable acres. So if you take the 300 acres and divide it by the $1.1 billion in infrastructure costs, remember that's only a portion of it, you're at $84 a square foot. And again, if the first phase is at least $100 million, you're going to have a large first phase. And the message here is that there are only really 2 primary land uses that can absorb those types of costs in big phases. One is a campus office development, and I think you know what those all are. And then there's residential. It doesn't mean that there can't be other land uses with those phases as complementary. They can have retail, they could have a hotel, but what we're trying to say is that a retail project is not going to make it as a first phase and open this up. Hotel project, which is maybe 3 to 5 acres, is not going to be big enough. It's going to have to be part of a bigger, those land uses can complement and be part of a bigger, even a solar farm, but it needs to be part of a bigger project. So in conclusion, the feasibility is obviously it's going to be market driven. This project's going to be done when the market makes sense to do it, and there's varying time frames on when that can be. Nobody really has a precise estimate on when that would be. It's most likely going to be in large parcels. I mean, it's hard to say with the information now, but it's probably in the phasing. I'm just picking 50 acres apiece, maybe 650 acres, which gets to 300. That's the type of thing. Many of the costs to open up the site appear fixed, and they're not sensitive to the land uses. So that's an important characterization and I know I'm being somewhat repetitive here, but just the cost of closing the landfill is well in excess of $100 million. So it's not going to be a small first phase. Unless somehow you can carve off some small pieces, it's not going to be a series of 5-acre parcels. There was a question brought up by staff: what happens less than 300 acres is approved? Then, in other words, the 600 plus acres, more of that is set aside for open space, so the 300 goes to 200. Well, then the fixed cost that you have to incur gets divided by 200 acres instead of 300 acres. And so, the development economics of the world is going to have to evolve to a point that it can fit on and make sense on 200 acres, and it's going to be a higher density project. And right now, given the size of it, it's hard to imagine, but it's not impossible that it could be done in the future. I mean, I can remember a time when I could never imagine housing at Candlestick Point. So the world does change, but at this point, though, going less than 300 acres is going to just put more pressure on trying to make the development economics work. It's going to be harder to do, at least based upon the technical information. And again, I'm being a little repetitive here. The market is dynamic. This is a long-term project. It's going to continue to change. And when the developer does come forward with a precise project later on, you'll probably go through the same technical analysis again to figure out what the right balance is between what Debbie is talking about and what we're talking about and all those different matters, because right now it's such a conceptual project. Mm-hmm. So that would conclude our comments.
Thank you. Okay, so we did have a study session beforehand. Are there any remaining or follow-up questions before we go to public comment?
I have questions, but I'll wait,
okay.
Cliff is going to wait too.
Okay.
I have one question for Mr. Kelly. In his report, he mentions value engineering. What do you mean by value engineering?
Well, it's simply these. As you look at the BKF numbers, they'll say which BKF is an engineering firm that provided, they collected all the numbers for the site development costs. That's the $1 billion number. I mean, they bring in a lot of technical. I mean, basically, you just get refined. You do refinements, and you figure out ways to do things more efficiently, or can they be phased? There's ways to save money, do them collectively. So basically, it's going through an engineering process to try to do the project more efficiently and still have the same results at the end. At this point, it's conceptual, so until there's a specific project, you can't get to that level at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Everyone
I don't have anything.
ready for public comment?
Thanks, Tim.
Great, thank you. So at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing, and we have a number of slips. If anyone hasn't submitted a slip and would like to speak, you can hand it to our city clerk. Each person will have 5 minutes, and we have a light system, so when you get to 1 minute remaining, the yellow light will come on, and then when the red light comes on, it means your time is up. So please wrap up. So we'll start first with Kevin Burke.
Oh, oops. How's it going? Thanks for having this at night. It's really nice. I'm a renter in San Francisco, and a lot of them are, a lot of the meetings they have are at 2 p.m., so I appreciate you taking time out of your nights to have this meeting and have an opportunity for public comment. I'm a renter in San Francisco. I'm a small business owner. I'm also a potential homeowner. It's my interest in the project is my girlfriend and I have been saving up money to try to buy a house. As you know, it's pretty expensive to do so in this area. I'd just like to point out that the economic analysis and the economic benefits as part of this survey missed out on a pretty large component of the overall economic benefit of the project, which would be the surplus to renters and homeowners in the form of lower prices for apartments and for homes in the project. 4,400 units would do a lot to lower prices, as we've seen in San Francisco since we've had a lot of supply come online in the last year and a half. We've seen prices decrease by 5 to 9%. I think that it can't be understated. If you're paying $200 less per month in rent, that's at the end of the year about $1,600 extra in your pocket. $2,400 minus the taxes. Anyway, I'm a small business owner as well. Lower prices means it increases the creativity and vitality of the region, which helps our artists and helps a lot of people in the community who are interested in starting businesses, such as myself. The cheaper it is to live here, the easier it is to try something new, to try to experiment. If you're paying $3,000 a month in rent, it's sort of trickier to do that at the margin to start a company. So if we make it cheaper if we invest in our housing and make it cheaper to build housing, we should have more small business ownership and small business formation at the margin, which is another economic benefit that I think was not mentioned in the survey. Again, this is not a knock on you guys. I know you were focused on the city revenues and cost aspects of it. We already have 40,000 people commute to San Francisco every day from places as far away from Stockton. I think it makes sense to try to build close to where people live and not turn this into another community center. I agree that San Francisco should do more in terms of building housing to address that imbalance, and I'm working on that as well. But I think we should all step in and do our part. And I understand all of the plans are net positive on a revenue perspective. I guess I would just like to say, I acknowledge that the business plans and the ecology plans would put the city in a better financial position. But I guess what's our goal, right? Is our goal to try to put the city in the best financial position, or ensure that our kids can continue to live in our cities, and our firefighters and our school teachers and our transit employees can continue to live near where we work. Shorter commutes have a really big impact on happiness, not just for me, but for all of the employees that commute and live and work in our areas. And we could do a lot to do that by supporting the developer's plan. Finally, I'd just like to conclude by saying, if the city is satisfied that the project is revenue neutral from a cost and revenue perspective from the city, I think we should let the developer choose the best way to build a project without worrying about their risk or their potential profits or losses. The same way if someone applied for a business license for some crazy idea like frozen yogurt or something like that, you might think it's a bad idea, but you'd say, hey, knock it out, try your best. It's I guess it's our role in government to be responsible at how we spend money, but then also encourage creativity in the business workplace, encourage creativity in our areas. And I think if the developer has an idea of how to do that, they want the housing units, and I'm in favor of the housing units as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Rick Branson.
Good evening. My name is Rick. I'm a resident of San Francisco. The reason why I came to this is because, Kevin told me about it, but it really struck me because my wife currently works. She just started working down here at. They moved this company called The Real Real. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Mm-hmm. They moved a big facility down here on Bayshore, and she's really loving working there. And I work in the city, and it just struck me how big of a deal this is just for the region, but also it made it pretty personal for me in terms of I would actually consider something like that. There aren't a lot of places close to the city as well as close to her work that would actually make sense. There's stuff in Daly City and South San Francisco, but I think in terms of the opportunity to buy a new house, the opportunity to actually have a place to you could have a family, not live, move out of sort of the apartment lifestyle, was something that really struck me. I also thought it just an opportunity for the Bay Area as a region. I've lived here for about 5 years. I was born in California. Actually, I'm from Southern California, and it's crazy. I've used to ride the Caltrain down south, and I saw this land sitting next to the tracks, and it would always just strike me. We'd go through the Bayshore station, and there would just be all this empty land, and I just thought, man, what is the deal? Like, I'm paying $4,000 a month for an apartment, commuting, so many miles down south, and I pass by this land that's just like completely empty. And that sort of was something I saw almost every day. And when I heard about this, I was I was blown away just by the number of units that were the scale of this project. So I wanted to come by and share my support. I saw the other proposal for hotels. I think that's probably maybe a better short-term option financially. But if you look at sort of the way that the sort of dynamism of the economy here, with tech being here, hotels are just kind of something that kind of comes and goes with the economy. Whereas, as you probably know, property taxes kind of tend to go up, or at least stay where they are. And there's a downturn. I was looking at the statistics for the number of the hotel occupancy that went down during the .com crash, and actually between 2000 and 2003, the occupancy actually dropped by 30%. The number of people that were actually using hotel rooms. So there's like a real economic, impact that would have to sort of go down the sort of hotel route. So I want to make that comment. Other than that, it'd be great to have more places for families to be, and for other people, I'm sure, here in Brisbane have children who are going to grow up and want to live in the area. And right now, for most people, the average sort of person who is looking for a house, saving up $200,000 to $300,000 to put a down payment on a $1 million or more property is not really feasible. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kyle Conway. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
Hello, my name is Kyle Conroy. I am also a San Francisco resident, currently a renter. Just wanted to come here and voice my support for the developer's plan for building the 4,400 units of housing. Currently don't own a car in San Francisco. I'm a renter, so I look to live close by transit. Obviously take the Caltrain very often, and I share Rick's sort of disbelief of these sort of empty spaces near the Bayshore station. And I'm also currently saving up and looking to purchase a house in the area. It's pretty difficult to save up the amount of money that's necessary, especially for somebody as you know, the real estate situation is dire, and not just in the city of San Francisco, but in the state of California. And housing is not a city-by-city issue, it is a regional issue. And Brisbane would most certainly be on my list on a place to live, and I would love to live near, say, transit and near Caltrain. And I think there are many other people that share that, share that belief. I'll keep it quick, and just wanted to say thank you again.
Thank you. Dana Dilworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I had read this more as just land use in general and not just specifically the finances. But what I had come to suggest is that because of how things are happening with our federal environmental protection used to protect agencies and things like that we should actually move towards the precautionary principle and consider the land uses that the Planning Commission had done, which were low impact and not flooding it with a lot of people who during an earthquake or some type of storm surge would experience the ground not being solid. I know they see this as a bountiful land. It is not solid land. It is filled with water saturation underneath it, and during certain geotechnical events, it is not safe. And so I'm wondering if in these analyses that the cost of risk has been added into this, of the chances of when they pierce down through an unknown layer and discover that there's a pocket of something very volatile, or my problem with the plan is that it doesn't even map a particular setback from the tank farm. So if you read the plan, what it says, somewhere in there it says, we want to be able to develop according to market conditions, so we could move these things around. You got to look at that language, because, let's keep putting the people closer and closer to the tank farm, because they will be the first ones to let you know when that burner goes off in the middle of the night and how absolutely foul it is. But, hey, let Universal Paragon get thousands of people in their back pocket to want to have housing out there. So I came to suggest that we take on a more precautious approach rather than to try to figure out how much we can do and how quickly. I think it would be a disaster if you were to phase the cleanup, which is somewhat written into the plan, and that partly because you don't want people out there when they discover, like they already have up on the Schlag Lock, that there are some underground storage tanks that, we just didn't have adequate information ahead of time. And there are like 3 or 4 other housing developments recently where they've uncovered toxins. And so the solution is to put the parking lot there. And that's actually the solution that they have on the Schlag Lock, is that the parks are the most toxic places. And the reason they're allowing that is because you're not going to be there 24/7. You only go to the parks for limited periods of time. Therefore, they can be the most toxic areas. What a totally backwards way to plan your community. So I suggest that we start with a precautionary principle and think of ways to make that land viable without putting people at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Anya Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agency. I heard a lot about the redevelopment agency and a successor agency that you know about. I was actually part of the formation of the first redevelopment agency for Sierra Point, and we had a pretty good plan there. And I think my better half was part of the second redevelopment that had to do with the Baylands in the 80s. And the fact that was just barely touched here is that the city has been invested in this Baylands development ever since by giving up the tax increment property tax and financing, putting it in the development part. And now that we have the successor agency, we even have to wait to pay those bonds off under the successor agency before you get the tax back, full property tax. So we're still investing in the Baylands continuously ever since the 80s. And then we have a debt that the successor agency is owing the city for the marina bonds. So we have a big investment of the city. You should take this into account as the whole picture. Just like a developer really should be putting in the cost of all this planning in their calculations. I don't know if it's done. I think I heard it's not. Now, in the 80s then, 89 was when they bought the property, right? From Southern Pacific. And as part of that price, they accepted a full cleanup responsibility. So in effect, that was part of their purchase price and had nothing to do with what development they might get. It was pure speculation that they could brainwash you to give them maximum development so they could make profit and pay for the cleanup from that instead of as part of the original purchase. And I would be very interested in knowing, maybe from your consultants here, what the cleanup would have cost in '89. $89.
We can have that question come through the council.
Good. I hope you ask. Because that, if they had cleaned it up and then come and said, we've spent this much money, please let us develop, and then come with a plan that didn't have all this conditional that you have to approve, it would have been already cleaned up. But this is over and over you've been trying to, there's been effort to convince you that you have to approve development so that they can pay for the cleanup. That's not the case at all. You have no responsibilities. We, the people, have no responsibility for the cleanup or the coverage of the cost. It's part of their responsibility. And so the very smart call for the analysis of the fiscal financial cost of the Planning Commission recommendation. That is the formal city plan before you, or recommendation. And it's very valid for you to have some sort of conceptual preliminary evaluation of the fiscal impacts of that recommendation. Planning Commission has nothing to do with a cleanup cost. Has to do with what would that development bring, and not how it could be financed, but what would it do in terms of the EIR has already been discussed. We know what the impact would be. And so that's what you really need to get into and get rid of the thought that you have to approve something to clean up. Thank you.
Thank you. Corey Smith.
Good evening, members of the City Council. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight. A couple of the assumptions that were taken regards to the analysis that were done in some of the different plans. I know there was an example of a hotel that was originally going to go into the Mission Rock area in San Francisco that ended up taking significantly longer than anticipated. And while a 1,600 or 1,500 room hotel could exist, I think there is a reality that is there that would be significantly less than that. UPC has owned the land for a very long time, and I'm the first one to say I wish they had built 4,400 units in 1989, but that's not the reality that we live in today. And the reality is that the only real increased value that they've had on the land is the increased value of the land itself. And if they were to decide to sell it, then theoretically you could make money depending on inflation, but they've been operating essentially at a loss this entire time. And through the analysis done, and specifically the consultant from KMG, I believe is the acronym, really took a lot of my words out of my mouth. And we really do believe that a large mixed-use project is really going to ultimately be the most financially feasible project for the area. There are a number of people that have kind of pointed out, this is very much about a market and return on investment. And kind of one of the golden numbers we have that we operate in development in San Francisco is you have to hit a 6% return at a very, very minimum, or simply nothing will happen. The cost of remediation today, since we need to do it, if we decide to do it, is going to be very, very high. There are transit improvements that are going to be expensive. There's a number of community benefits that and I believe everybody here, if something happens, want to see in the project itself. We are strong supporters of our unions. If you folks want them paying prevailing wages, then that is another cost on top of it. We're also strong supporters of building subsidized middle-income housing, so the unions, the workers that actually do the work, have the opportunity to live there. Well, more subsidized housing, more affordable housing continues to drive up the cost. It's a conversation we have a lot in San Francisco, actually, because I'm constantly hearing from people, well, it needs to be 50% subsidized affordable housing, or we don't want anything at all. Well, the reality is you're not going to get anything at all. And if you want nothing at all to happen on the site, well, that's That's a reality, and that's a decision, obviously, that you have the right to make. But if we do want to be able to add something to it, then there does have to be an economic return on investment. And then one of the examples that got brought up regarding a solar field, I would personally be shocked if that was economically feasible, kind of in the grand scheme of things. And then one other last point, a little bit independent from all of this. I have been going around to different neighborhood associations and companies around the Bay Area talking about housing and housing costs and supply and demand and kind of the regional impact of everything. And I'll follow up with all of you with an email, but I would love to be able to share that information with you. That comes from the expertise of our 160 members who build and design housing around the Bay Area. People find it a valuable resource. Hopefully you would as well. Like I said, I will follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Scharfman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilors. Just a couple of Jonathan Scharfman, UPC. A couple of points around first fiscal impact, and then economic feasibility. On the fiscal impact, as was really underscored during the workshop earlier. If you look at the four, and is in the materials that are in your packet, if you look at the fiscal impact of the four options in front of you, they're all net positive, but primarily, the primary difference between the CPP and the DSP and the variance really has to do with projected income to the city from transient occupancy tax from the hotels. So what that suggests is on a fiscal level, I don't want to overstate it, but it really is more of a level decision based on the city's principle of not wanting to have a negative fiscal impact, because it has been established, and I'd point to the hotel study that the city commissioned on Sierra Point a few years ago. It really began to identify the market, the reality of the marketplace for hotels in Brisbane, even in an up market. You know, there's a rational reason that the hotel site that we own in Sierra Point has been late to provide those additional taxes, and there's a rational reason why there's a projection of only 369 hotel rooms in the DSP as opposed to the 1,600 in the CPP, which essentially is there's just no market basis for that. So again, as generally a leveling consideration, I ask you to really think now on the development feasibility side. As you get further into this, I submit it truly is a puzzle that does require, as is reported here, a certain amount of revenue to support the cost of per acre for development out there. My suggestion, based on the analysis that has been asked for the Planning Commission recommendation, is that you radically readjust your expectation of what kind of community benefits you can extract from a site like this if you don't have a commensurate appetite for development that will support that. The CPP and the DSP both have, these are numbers that have been vetted with department staff in Brisbane. $100+ million bills, not for cleanup, but for the provision of open space that the community of Brisbane says they want, whether it's privately or publicly owned. So that open space has to be financed by something. The $25 million recycled water plant that the community has asked for as part of the sustainability program that was one of the mitigation measures that was set in the EIR. That requires a certain amount of development not just to make economically feasible to develop, but to make technically feasible to operate. So there are some overgeneralizations on the development feasibility side that are reflected in the KMA report that are acre to acre, assuming that you're developing the whole site. If the appetite of this council is for something less than has been analyzed in the CPP and the DSP, I submit that analysis for reducing the expectation of what the community benefits be looked at as well. We are prepared to supply revised cost estimates for those different scenarios to help your consultants do their work, but please do not feed the fantasy that you can just have the benefits without the level of development that it will take to support it. This really is a puzzle, and regardless of the very, very difficult pressure that's being put on you to not speak with us, there has to be a way for there to be a mutual understanding eventually of what is economically feasible to advance any project out there of any scale that is going to balance economic feasibility with the benefits that they provide to the city and the region. We remain poised, ready to work on that. We're very disappointed that this analysis, a year after the April 2016 analysis, doesn't really get into any reaction to the Planning Commission recommendation. Planning Commission recommendation basically said, give us all the candy and don't eat the broccoli. Please do the analysis and find out that if you truly only have an appetite for 1 million or 2 million feet of development, radically realter your expectations of what any development can provide and radically shrink the footprint, radically. I'm not talking about 600 acres. I'm talking about radically shrinking that footprint to fit what your appetite is in a way that's feasible, because that's the only puzzle that works. We are not in a position, nor would anybody in our shoes be in a position to do anything else. This happens all over California, all over the country. We're prepared to work with you, but please have realistic expectations about what can be done. Thank you.
Andrew Jordan.
Hello, my name is Andrew Jordan. I'm a renter in San Francisco. Thank you very much for taking the time to take on public comment. As you're all very aware, there's a bit of a housing crisis in the Bay Area at this moment. And as someone who's renting currently and aspires to one day own a home here, it's been really difficult to watch my friends and neighbors make the decision to leave the Bay Area as they realize that, even with two incomes, it's really not feasible to, own a home or start a family here. And everyone's looking, south, east, or figuring out where they can go to make this happen. With the development proposal, 4,400 units is an ability that makes a massive, massive difference in the Bay Area and really changes the affordability game. And it provides housing that's not only incredibly well located near transit and has the potential to be, at least for the Bay Area, relatively affordable. The developers put forward a plan which is, kind of meets the test of paying for itself, brings a ton of housing online in a time when it's desperately needed, and I want to come here and voice my support and hope the council would take it under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any more cards. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Paul Buscal?
Paul Buscal, Brisbane resident. So, thank you for having this evening. And, all the time that I spent on the draft environmental impact report, one of the things that stood out the most under the mitigated measures for every chapter that we worked on were feasibilities. And it came down to, it was stated in the DEIR as to mitigated measures will be done when feasible. And, you know, is the interchange to 101 from Geneva going to be done? No, it doesn't have to be done. You know, now we have the high-speed rail coming in. They're going to take over 100 acres of eminent domain. They haven't decided what side of the tracks of Tunnel Road they want it on. I mean, that should be a decision that we're making as a community with the developer to let them know where they need to put it. I mean, at least we should have that say as to where the rail yard's going to go for their maintenance yard for high-speed rail. Unfortunately, that wasn't part of our environmental impact report at the time, but it is now. So we need to look at that. The housing need for the region, yeah, we have a housing need for the region, but, you know, 2 middle income households are not going to be able to afford to buy houses. It's just not going to happen. You know, I'm a tradesperson, and I couldn't buy a house on the income of a tradesperson today. So it's a fantasy to think that we're going to be able to supply housing to people that need housing. It's only going to be for the people that can afford to buy the housing, which is over $1 million. You know, when I hear things mentioned about regional needs and what we need to do as a community for the region, we are doing what we need to do as a community for the region. We're being very careful. We're working on this process as a community with the developer. Sometimes things are said that it leaves a question in my mind when the analysis said that there was 300 acres of open space. It's like 140 acres of open area and or open space. Or it says open space and or open area. Nothing says it's going to be 25% open space. You know, open space just means public property. Open area means private property. So I don't know where the 300 acre figure came for open space and or open area for the Baylands, but that's not going to happen. You know, the infrastructure costs for this community and the operational costs are astronomical. We can't afford 4,000 units in this community for the upkeep. You know, we're going to be on the hook for that. We're going to be on the hook for the infrastructure. We're going to be on the hook for the maintenance. I've made a proposal before that why don't we take a corner up near the Schleslach where they're already developing for San Francisco and annex that and do high-density housing that the developer needs for their project and let the city bring the infrastructure. We don't need mitigated measures where we're bringing water in from a Oakdale water district to get their allotment for water. San Francisco has the water. Let them supply the water. They want to bring the light rail down into the Baylands. They want to bring Geneva in to the Baylands. They want to have this transit hub. That could all happen if they develop that north end, okay? We as a community can't do that. We can't support that. You know, this isn't not in our backyard type of attitude. This is a community that rallies together and works on difficult issues. So I hope we can continue to work on difficult issues and not be pressured by anybody, including ourselves, to make a reasonable decision for the Baylands and the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Mr. Miller? Former mayor and council member?
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say I watched a study session earlier on TV, and I thought you were really asking good questions, and so I was very impressed. So I was thinking, hey, council members are doing their job. So
we did better than the last time.
Well,
kind of critical the last time, so I'm glad that we received high marks this time.
Okay, no, you did good job. I was very impressed. The issue I want to raise, which follows from what's been said before, is something else you need to give thought to in terms of what more information you need and how it needs to be collected and organized. And that is, at some point when you reach a level of decision, you're going to have to go out to the voters and ask for their approval to go ahead. And the question becomes, what kind of information do they need in order to be able to make an informed decision? And believe it or not, I actually agree with Mr. Sharpman and some other speakers as well, that I think the fiscal and economic analysis is just several years old. It needs to be really updated, and they can do it, but they need to be instructed to do it, and that's where you all come in. Because one of the things that needs to be looked at is, as you said at the study session, and Sharpman said too, you got to look at the Planning Commission and look at its attributes and consequences, and make an analysis of it. I think that makes sense. I would imagine you're going to come up with something that's different. That should also be analyzed with its pluses and minuses and revenues and costs and so forth. And that needs to be done. It would seem to me, before you go out to the voters, because they're going to say, okay, so what are the implications of this? How's it going to affect Brisbane? What are the consequences in a variety of dimensions? And so as you sort of consider what to do, you need to keep this in mind. And I think that one of the areas that needs significant updating is the whole fiscal economic area. And that also includes, as Cliff knows, the whole sustainability dimension too. That also needs to be built in. If you're going to bring something to the voters, it needs to have some solid, grounded information. And you need to ask for that. The consultants are available, they can do it. But the one thing I would find out if you can get, because everything they're using, they're assuming that because the developer provides this and that information on the cost of this and that, therefore that's the only source of information that's necessary to obtain. And it would seem to me that you might want a little bit more independent information on some dimensions. Again, I think, your consultants could do that if they were asked to do it. But that will cost a little bit more money. But then you have a separate, more independent source of information, particularly, for instance, on the phasing. As they point out, Mr. Kelly pointed out that, in the so-called horizontal cost, if you do it in a phase and you don't do everything at once, and the term that you picked up, value engineering, if you do all these things, then you wouldn't be talking about $1.1 billion. Maybe, the Geneva Ave overpass doesn't happen for, 30 years. So if that's the case, then you can think a lot differently about the kind of funding that you need in the early stages. And that's phasing. And none of that's in the fiscal and economic analysis. So there's a lot of updating and increased expansive information that you need in order to be able to make an informed decision, I would think. So, good luck.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak who hasn't yet spoken? Okay. Seeing no hands, let's bring it back to the council. Who would like to start with any follow-up questions, if any?
The only thing I have is this, some of the questions that were asked by the community, if we can get the information on that. No.
At a later date, you're saying, for when we get into deliberations?
Yeah, some of the...
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Some of the stuff that Dana Dilworth asked for and Anya Miller. And also update us on I think what Paul was talking about with high-speed rail, if we can get an update on that.
Okay, great. Madison?
I have two questions that I saved from earlier. One of them is regarding, in the study session, we talked a lot about like shifting costs to the private sector and maintenance costs and upkeep of land and things like that. And about all the ways that you could keep the costs low for the city. And I just wanted a little bit more information on that, because is that those things that you need to apply for and in order to be able to shift costs in that way? Because I would think that if you could do that, cities would just do that all the time and they would get out of responsibility in paying for a lot of things. So all that sounds fantastic to just shift costs to other people, but in reality, I mean, how much of that can you just do, or how much of it is really something that has to be allowed of you?
Yeah. You know
Well, you're right that if the tools that I'm talking about, specifically the CFD for maintenance costs of roads, it is subject to voter approval of the property owners or the registered voters within the area. And so it's not a tool that can usually be implemented through citywide, because you have all the voters that would have to approve the formation of that district. But when you have a property like the UPC property, where it's under just ownership of a few owners, and it's a property that's going to be redeveloped, then that is something that that's the condition under which you can usually secure voter approval for the establishment of these districts, because it's done through the development agreement, which the developer is is a party to the development agreement, and so it's through that negotiation that you establish the district.
And then my next question is in regards to hotels. And there's been a lot of discussion about hotels tonight, and whether they're really feasible or not. And just from my take of looking at the numbers, seems like having a positive fiscal impact is really contingent on the presence of hotels. And of course, the more hotel rooms, the greater the positive fiscal impact. And there's been discussion about, what really is feasible and how many rooms can we really expect. And there was discussion about phasing and at what point, the hotels would be built, because those are really connected with that positive fiscal impact and making sure that the city is not in a poor financial position as a result of the project. So there's also been a lot of discussion about, market demand and whether it's doable just with the way that the market is. And so what I'm wondering is, if it's a 30-year project, do you just phase it so that most of the hotels are built in the first part of the project? Because I'm assuming over a 30-year project, the market is going to shift. The market is going to shift multiple times. And so I'm just worried about being in a position where all of a sudden that key component that I think is one of the key aspects to making sure that it is a positive fiscal impact it won't be able to be built. So how do you make sure that you're okay, that you're covered?
Well, you're right. This is a long-term project, and market conditions will change significantly over the course of the project. That's why one mechanism that can be particularly useful in this situation is examining the fiscal prior to each phase, and that's how you can manage it. And you can manage the fiscal and making sure that each phase generates a positive, or cumulative generates a positive impact on the city. Because you can be in a situation where one specific phase might be have a fiscal deficit. But if the prior phase generates a huge fiscal impact, then cumulatively you might say, well, that's fine because we know that this one specific phase has these uses that aren't going to generate a fiscal surplus. But overall, with the prior phase, combined with the prior phase with this one, and you can do also an analysis of, once a phase is built, what are the actual fiscal impacts of that phase, and you keep on top of it. And that's how you can address what happens in market conditions and changing markets and making sure that you're protected fiscally. Because things will change. I mean, you can look at Mission Bay, what happened. It was initially entitled for a back office, and it has just evolved over time because market conditions have changed. So, and that will happen here too. So you want to have an envelope that's flexible enough to address the market, but you also have provisions in that development agreement that protect the city to make sure that you're never exposed fiscally, regardless of what's being built out there. And through these tools, you really can manage the fiscal situation, or the phase won't be built because that will be a condition for going forward that it generates a fiscal surplus, either through reducing costs or by shifting the costs or by adding the land use components. But it's generally not feasible to just say, well, we're going to require all of the hotels be built up front because there has to be market for it. And so there isn't market for all those hotels. So that won't work. So it is really a balanced approach with the land uses and with managing your costs and structuring it so that it produces this fiscal benefit and it's financially feasible to the developer, because you won't have anything if it's not financially feasible either. So that's how we would recommend that you proceed.
Okay. Those are all my questions.
Clark?
Done.
Cliff?
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I kind of want to go back to that, that question about being, in that position where, the Baylands is, self-sufficient in providing the revenue for the services that are out there. One of the speakers spoke about, not wanting the city to be on the hook for this and that, and there are mechanisms in place to ensure that the city doesn't, isn't responsible for those things. And so in your analysis, you talked about how you looked at the city being 100% responsible for the open space and the services and recreation, and that's how your analysis was put together to show what the expected revenue streams are going to be. Some are positive, and if the hotels aren't in the equation, they could be negative. So what I'd like for you to do is to present some analysis where, you had mentioned that you're working on the Bay Meadows project, and that in that project they have implemented some of these mechanisms. So, I mean, there's lots of mechanisms that you can use, and so, I don't want to say, okay, here's this crystal ball, and you got to figure out what the city would want, and as far as mechanisms go. But I'm going to rely on your expertise and what typically is required from cities in these larger developments. Councilmember Davis said, well, all cities would do this. Well, there's only so many really large developments out there where you can do this, and this is one of them. And so I'd like for you to take those ones that are typically used and then apply that to the numbers that you have here. I mean, not the numbers, but the uses that are in the plans that have been that are before us. Let's see. One of the things that we did talk about during the workshop was the Sierra Point landscaping and lighting district. So the city of Brisbane already has one of those types of mechanisms in place, and so and Stuart, if you can just kind of provide some insight. So out at Sierra Point, this district provides the funding for all of the landscaping and lighting needs, and what other uses or services, should I say, are provided from those funds out at Sierra Point?
Those are the two that it does provide, but it provides for the street lights. It provides for the median maintenance. Within the median maintenance, there's a number of things like the gopher control, and there's just a slew of different issues that deal with when you have to deal with median maintenance and with the landscape maintenance and with the lighting issues.
Okay. All right. And
Public Works could tell you more specifically what all the detailed tasks are than I can.
Sure. But the city, can create these districts to cover the services that it feels need to be covered, so that our general fund isn't used to cover those, and not just during the initial phases, but after the build out is done, in perpetuity for the site, that the site is structured in a way that it's always taking care of itself. Mm-hmm. That Central Brisbane, Sierra Point, the industrial park, the current areas that outside the Baylands are not funding those services.
Well, it is possible to estimate what the burden could be on the property owners for services. So what portion they could fund, based upon it's really tied to the value of the property, which is the assessed value, and so it can be estimated what that burden and what other the burdens are in other areas in the market area. You look at what properties are what the special taxes are or the assessment taxes are in other competing locations, and then that's how you can gauge what the market will support. And you say, well, if we apply those same assessments to the Baylands, then how many streets and how many what are those costs that then could be shifted and funded through those mechanisms. You can estimate that.
Okay, and you talked about how just because a street is privately funded to maintain it, it's still a public street in the sense that pedestrians and bicyclists use the street.
Correct.
There aren't any restrictions.
And actually, those tools like the landscaping and lighting district and the CFD, those are specifically for public infrastructure. So it's publicly owned, but it's maintained through this private special tax.
Okay. And then, under the mechanisms, number 7, the developer payments, it says a development agreement can require the project's developer to provide cash payments to the city to offset the loss of tax revenue from closing businesses until the new development generates sufficient tax revenue to fund municipal services and offset the losses. And so is that a loan, or is that just money that in the development agreement we agree to that, okay, we need this money to offset the revenue stream that we would expect, and that's made up somewhere else? Or I guess that's all part of the development.
It's all part of the development agreement. So it's all part of this overall financing plan. And it requires negotiations with the developer. It's what is financially feasible for the project to bear. But that is something that is done in projects that I was working on one where there was a racetrack that was being torn out. And so that was generating on at $1.8 million a year or something of revenue to the city. And that was going to be then offset by payments until the new development came online that then was funding sufficient, the same level of surplus to the city as the prior use. And so, but it's all part of this package. And so going back to Mr. Scharfman's comments, it is about, it's a negotiation. And so you have to look at what is feasible from the private developer's perspective, as well as what are the needs of the city. And you work together to come up with a plan that's feasible for both parties.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. All right. You talked about the opportunities to consider new taxes. Being creative, like the admission one. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about the community facilities districts. Okay, so that's in the potential funding sources infrastructure document. So, Debbie, you talked about how you need to have the voters, right? It has to go before the voters in the district. Of course, nobody lives out there. So now it goes before the property owners, and in a sense, we have one, I got a couple, right? I mean, very, very few. So, and in the development agreement, you know, that would be worked out. I mean, that makes sense to put something like that forth. Say if housing was allowed, and now you've developed some housing. Now you have people who are living out there. Now things have changed. So, what kind of impact would that have? Now you have a population.
Well, if homeowners were there, when they buy the home, they would be disclosed as to what is the special tax that's on their property that they're purchasing and what their maximum tax would be. So that would be part of the disclosure when you buy a home as to what are all the assessments on that home. So that's how that works.
Okay, so the new homeowners,
they bear the cost.
They bear the cost. Okay, so
yes.
then that
it's shifted from the developer, the property owner. It's through the chain of ownership of the property, and so it just goes from. That's how it's a tax on the property.
Okay, and then the second bullet point, and then the use of funds for the CFDs, and then you have a lister of streets and parks and school sites, libraries, child care centers, and what about things? I know this isn't the finite list. In our sustainability framework, we talked about, how do you fund new technologies in regards to sustainability? So maybe it's, new upgrades in solar panels, or there's, new buses, and we have these, driverless buses that run on electricity, and maybe they're not originally part of the fleet, but now we want those buses because they're more environmentally friendly and more efficient. So can those types of things be part of the funding
on the EIFDs
on the CFDs for upgrading sustainability upgrades?
I'm not certain about typically it's capital facilities that have a lifespan of 15 years, and that's what the requirement is.
Okay.
And the EIFD, some of those other the tax increment funding sources, you can also fund some assistance for vertical force or industrial uses, but I would have to check on the specifics regarding buses, for example.
Okay. And then, so these funds come in, and then who I guess it's just like how general fund money comes in, city staff determines how they are
it's used. Very much like your assessment district. So, except for so it's a special, these funds would be restricted for use in this area. And the CFD, you can have, sometimes generally you have both a CFD for infrastructure and then a CFD for services. So you have two components of the CFD. And so the CFD for services, those funds are used, the city manages those funds, and then they're used for the maintenance of the facilities. The difference between an assessment district and a CFD is that an assessment district, there has to be this nexus between the beneficiary and the one who's paying the tax. They're not paying a tax, it's an assessment. Yeah. It's not a special tax. And so, but with the CFD, there's no nexus requirement. So effect that they can pay, the property owners that are paying a tax, they can be paying for services that may be benefiting another property owner more than themselves. I mean, there's no requirement of this proportionate share of the benefit relative to the burden that you pay. And
yeah,
so,
okay. So you have these infrastructure financing tools. They're being funded within within the Baylands, but then development that occurs that creates financial benefits, say like TOT or property taxes. Then that money goes to the city. That goes into the general fund.
Correct.
So here you can have these mechanisms that are working to pay for the services within the Baylands. They create the development, then benefit that comes from the development. Those resources can come to the city, and they don't just stay with putting back into.
Absolutely. All of general fund money goes to the general fund, and it is just used
as the council deems.
Yeah, it's discretionary. There's no restriction on the use of those funds.
Okay. All right. Just one last thing. So, actually, you know what? I'm going to hold off on this. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry, did you have any questions?
As we go along, this is such a complicated issue. I keep having more questions, and then some get answered and some don't. One question I do have for BKF is on for the consultants, on the BKF document with the costs for construction estimates and the horizontal costs, which are the costs that need to be done before land is ready, as I understand it, for building. Your report used the $1.1 billion figure, and all these reports, and this report is dated September 2013, have 3.7 million to 1.4 billion with a B, as the estimate amount. So where did your company come up with the 1.1? So that's 25% less than these figures.
I understand. First of all, those numbers were provided by UPC. They were done by you. So the city at this point in the process, unless you direct the city to do this, has not had a separate civil engineer go through and, as one of the speakers said, do a second cut at all these numbers to figure out what could be, what it could be phased. There's, that type of thing. It is a high, as I said in the beginning of the presentations, this was a high-level qualitative analysis that used some technical numbers from BKF and UPC to illustrate our points. But there are issues out there that I don't have the answers to. I mean, can those be phased?
But my question is the documents that were provided by BKF on behalf of UPC are 25% more than your estimate. So are you already finding 25% reduction?
The truth is I'd have to go back and see exactly where the 1.1 is, but I think they're going up. So all the points we made just are reinforced. But why I had 1.1 and they have 1.3, I can't answer that.
Through the chair, if I might, for example, on the 12 million square foot build out, the raw numbers, if you take the main infrastructure total and the comprehensive cost total, and you exclude out the 10% engineering design, fees, government testing, construction contingency, that gets you very, very close to 1.1 billion, for example, on that.
But wouldn't you, if you're looking at an economic development, an economic feasibility, and this figure that was presented does not include land costs. It does not include profit by the landowner. It does not include pre-development costs, EIR costs, which I'm sure that the developer has incurred many of those and does have an expectation of profit. So it seems odd to me to see
well, if you go back, the big picture comment of our presentation is that the size of these numbers, whether they could be phased or shaved down, are substantial, and the land use program that's going to have to do it are going to have to be major projects. They're going to have to, you can't, whatever the number, you just can't use a 5-acre project and.
No, I'm not asking about.
No, but that was the point of the analysis. The point, we did not take it to the next level of fine-grained assessment that you're talking about, how to look at it and break it apart into pieces and how it could be phased and things like that. That was not done. We don't have that information.
No, I wasn't asking about phasing or where we could do valued engineering to reduce the costs. I was just wondering why the UPC numbers weren't in there. So that was my question for that. And so one would assume that with the feasibility study that we would want that the developer has an expectation of their land increasing in value and them making a profit instead of losing money. And in using the figures provided by this report, you did some using the 1.1 million as a base figure that we can, is an assumption. There was an assumption on pre-development bare land infrastructure costs that came down to relatively close to the value for certain uses, where with per acre cost
for campus office and large residential, they're getting close to being near the threshold. Yes,
of what it costs them to have bare land. So at this point, with this, it doesn't look that either residential or campus, from a developer's point of view, using the numbers that are in this document, would make fiscal sense for them to pursue it this time.
That's correct.
And so, I mean, and that's what I got.
I understand. So they still needed a lot of work for the developer to move forward. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was reading
you're
that
right.
correctly.
No, so yeah.
There is no profit.
There's no land cost
right
in there.
now.
There's no profit in there. There's no CEQA cost in there. So yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
So on the face of it,
make the lines cross. Yes.
The face of it for what that land is valued at now, clean, buildable infrastructure land, we're not at the feasible point yet at this cost structure.
As the applicant would tell you, it depends on how much you entitle it for and how many units or how much square footage, of development rights. And so, obviously, the higher the level. I'm not advocating for a high level of entitlements. I'm just saying, the entitlements are tied to the timing of when they can afford the cost. So, that's what's going on.
And a lot of people have commented on Sierra Point and that it's similar, that it's developable land. And Clark made this comment during our study session that hotels, the expectation of building a whole slew of hotels out there is remote. That there's an existing infrastructure, ground ready, basically, space for a hotel that has not been built in 20 years. or more. And then we also have 2 office campuses that have developer agreements and are, again, ready to go, so to speak, and have neared and been extended with their development agreements. So those are all in the 10+ year range of projects going forward. So whatever we do out at the Baylands, we have to have the anticipation that even with the infrastructure put in, that we may not have any actual development for a long time, and really look at what the financing tools, how that's going to be paid for and guaranteed that a project will go forward with whatever phasing they do.
So. It's a tough puzzle to solve, yes, because I don't think the private sector is going to go invest $100 or $200 million without having an end user to pay for it. It's my guess. And so, yeah, this is a real challenge, yeah.
And then in the financing tools, it was commented that you could have the city give back some of their tax increment to help fund infrastructure, and that the county may be willing to participate in that, or other tax districts. And I was wondering if the county has been approached and shown interest in participating in giving tax money back?
No, we haven't approached them yet.
Okay. That's my questions for now.
Thank you. Clark?
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Just, I guess Tim and Debbie have insinuated tonight, taking a point from Ray Miller, because we do have the Planning Commission recommendation, and I would like to see what the financials are on that, and but us as a council are going to start our deliberations, I think, in June time frame, somewhere in there. And right now we're at 10,000 foot level, all the data, and the Planning Commission boiled it down and made a recommendation to what they, recommended to us, right? And so you have that, and whatever we collectively come up with and agree upon would then need to be analyzed, because that's boiling it down more. And then that kind of gives a direction of where we're going to go, I think, with land use and all that. And it kind of gives you more specifics and gives the developer, I guess, Jonathan, to your speaking of, whatever it is you guys are going to decide, we need to know what it is, so that way, we can plan accordingly, and I think that's really where we're at. Whatever the council collectively decides, then we'll go forward, do the analysis there, and that gives us, not us, but us and the community and the developer and everybody, even the folks that come from San Francisco, the housing advocates, an idea of the direction that we're going to go. And then at that point, that's where all the nuts and bolts start really turning, and then and eventually goes to the voters for the A or nay.
Yeah, I agree that that financial feasibility analysis of the Planning Commission's recommendation is going to be essential.
Yeah, I think it's important, because that's a recommendation, that was presented to us, and we need to know that also, and that has the large solar variable in it. I think that Anya, you and Kriebel have worked on, got the NREL study in it. So,
right. So I have one quick question and a comment. So the cleanup costs, you had mentioned that there was an estimate of $1.1 billion. So what level of cleanup was assumed for that cleanup cost?
The truthful answer to that is we would have to ask BKF, who their environmental consultant is, to answer that question, because we're just accepting these numbers as being reasonable numbers. So I don't have an answer to that.
Okay. And then I just wanted to respond to Terry's point about hotels and, looking at Sierra Point and using that as a model. And I think that's instructive, but I think we also need to recognize that that's a different area. It's on the other side of the 101. It has its geographic challenges, and there has been interest, in the properties there for both, office space, biotech, and the hotel site. But for, whatever reason, it hasn't made as much traction as other areas. But I think, we've seen that there are hotels that have been being built in the surrounding areas. So I wouldn't say we can't, it's not feasible just because of Sierra Point. And also, if we were to consider the entertainment variant, then if there were an entertainment complex, that would presumably create more demand for hotel rooms because people would want to come in to, go to special events, go to concerts, sports events, etc. So, the building itself at the Baylands can help create the demand for the hotels. So with that, unless anyone has any other questions.
I got one other thing, Madam Mayor. So, Clark, I like your recommendation to have the feasibility or economic study of the Planning Commission's recommendation. With the NREL feasibility study, it assumed that the environmental conditions at the site were not constrained. Obviously, that's not the case. It's very constrained. Should we have part of the study also be looking at the NREL feasibility study? Or is the Planning Commission's recommendation basically what they're recommending, and there's no need to do that?
Well, I think that's part of the data.
Because this NREL feasibility study to me has always been just it's been half baked. It's not complete, and it's just to me, I think it did a disjustice to the community when it was presented because it didn't include those costs. And whatever reason why they didn't do that, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but
I guess we've been throwing acronyms out, but for those that don't know, it stands for National Renewable Energy Laboratory, right?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that the Planning Commission's recommendation is basically based off of that feasibility study.
They didn't have any other economic data beyond what was provided previously.
Okay. So, but what was presented or what was studied in that feasibility study basically is what, for the most part, what the Planning Commission is recommending to the council.
Basically, the area, the scale of that
of the solar
energy
farm. Okay. All right. Then I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So with that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Mayor and Council matters. Item A, City Council schedule. So we all have a schedule attached to our agenda.
Pretty funny looking back at our original schedule from September. We're not that far off.
So we have a meeting coming up on May 4th on land use planning, aesthetics, housing, and population and related policy issues. May 23rd, applicant and community group presentations, followed by council deliberations in June and July. So do we have any proposed dates at this point for those deliberations?
You gave us quite a few dates.
Okay, we've all filled out a poll and...
Right, so there's quite a few dates, so we're going to have to come back at some meeting and for you to kind of actually specifically pick which ones you want to use. The challenge, of course, we have is we just don't know how much time this is going to take, but we can certainly, pick a number of dates to get started.
I had a comment on the 23rd.
Okay.
I talked to Clay about this. I have a flight actually at 1 a.m. that night. And when I originally was saying my availability, the flight's on the 24th, but It's because it's right up against, it's like at 1 a.m. Technically, I have to be there on the 23rd at the airport. So I was wondering, since that's our community group presentations night, there's really no need for a study session. So since we've been able to make ourselves available a little bit earlier, I was wondering if it's possible if we could start at 6 or 6:30 or just any time earlier than what we normally start, since we don't have that additional study session on that day.
I think that works for me.
I'd be okay with 6:30. At 6 o'clock is really
okay
unfeasible for me on a
Tuesday, right? So
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
That way we could be out of here earlier, and even if we were here for, 4 or 5 hours, I would still make it out in time.
Sure.
Okay, so
Awesome.
6:30
Thank you.
then on the 23rd. Okay.
Yes.
6 p.m.
6:30.
6:30.
6:30.
Oh, 6:30?
Does that work for you, Jonathan? We've got to make
Okay,
sure.
6:30 though? That's what we're agreeing upon?
Yeah, we would normally start at 7:30, so
Okay.
just 1 hour earlier. Okay. Everyone else okay with the schedule?
Yeah, and I did want to make a recommendation. So in June and July, we're going to have our council deliberations. We've absorbed a ton of information. What was, I think, really beneficial tonight was that we had Tim and Debbie, who really know their stuff, provide that economic analysis. And I think it would just be extremely helpful if we had, say, some folks, say someone who's one of the leading experts on climate change, give a presentation to the council on the importance of how or why you should do development the right way in regards to how you deal with climate change, or looking at someone to give a presentation on how do you create extremely efficient transportation systems, or how you build zero net emission buildings. We have folks in the community that say you can't do these things, but we know that we can. And I think that is extremely important that before we start having these deliberations, that maybe it would be helpful to have these really renowned people give a presentation before the council, and maybe kind of like how we did the speaker series. It's like a 2-week time frame, and maybe we have 2 nights and 2 speakers per night, and the council chooses those key topics. And if we decided, we were willing to do that, we'd give staff enough time to set those things up. So
kind of like the University of Brisbane speaker series we had back in
very similar to that. Absolutely. I think it would be helpful for the community as well to just kind of like say, hey, we can do this. It is being done, in regards to closed loop water systems or closed loop waste stream systems. And so, to me, by having that information, then with all the information that we've gathered so far, gives us a really good foundation to start deliberating.
I am totally down for that. My only concern is that I feel like in the beginning and pretty much consistently the whole time we've been discussing schedule, there's really been a strong emphasis on beginning and finishing deliberations kind of as quickly as possible. Just that's the way I've perceived the wish of the council. I'm totally fine with whatever. But, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but obviously we're going to be discussing the referendum at the next meeting. And that, of course, may influence how quickly you guys would like to move this forward. So I want to be conscious of the previous goal of really having this finished, and if there is going to be an election, trying to be sensitive to the fact that you don't want to be discussing things while you're campaigning. And I don't know if you guys have really thought about that yet, but I'm always open to more information. I think it's a great idea. It just sounds contradictory to the way that we wanted the schedule to work in the past. So I'm open to anything.
Yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from, and I wanted to get us moving through the process, but as you're taking in the information, listening to the public, and you want to do it right.
Sure.
And I mean, this project is so important. I mean, we live in this little town, but little towns sometimes make a big difference in the world. And this project is one of those, and things that can make a difference. And so I think it's best that we present or provide the council the best resources possible to make the proper decision. So that's what motivated me to say, okay, you know what? If it happens, I'm out campaigning during. While we're still dealing with this, so be it. But at least, we've gathered that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think always our main message from all of us has been wanting to do this right in the first place. And so I agree with you on that.
I'm okay with it. I just thinking through it is who chooses the experts.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Because we're looking for basically information that, we're going to really be subject to. And so, everything we're subjected to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
One of we're supposed to have a Bayland subcommittee meeting. And I did talk with Clay, about doing something like this. Andrea from the Integral Group, she's so well connected with all these people. I mean, their company, is
that's
associated
just
with those folks. It seems like someone like their group, their organization would be the most appropriate to help the city to find those folks and work with staff to bring them here.
That's just one part of it. I don't want to, overextend it for the summer.
No. I think it's something that we should try and do
deliberations
the first couple weeks of June.
I think we should still stick to the schedule and plan to finish the deliberations by the end of July.
I totally think that we can do that.
We did have that sustainability framework workshop at the beginning of this calendar, where we had the consultant who worked on the sustainability framework come in and talk about, I think, the things that you're talking about. And I agree, maybe a refresher would be helpful. I'm not sure we need, multiple sessions. And I do want to try and stick to the schedule as much as we can. And I think one way we can help move that along is, for all of us to, write down our questions, send them to the staff, and then so by the time we get to the deliberations, they've already had time to process that information, get any additional information collected, and we can kind of hit the ground running.
Well, one idea we could try and have compromise. When we were talking about weekends a while back, I wasn't too excited about that, but I said, if we want to do a combination, I'd be open to that, and I'm really happy to see that when we did, when we each filled out our availability, it seems like there are actually a lot of weekdays.
A lot of days.
A lot of weekdays, actually, that would work. So, when originally I wasn't excited about weekends was the argument that it would be a bigger chunk of time. So maybe 9 a.m. to 4. And I was thinking, I cannot deliberate for that many hours in a row. And I can't expect our citizens to sit through that many hours of deliberations, just straight deliberations. But what could be good is if we could use maybe a weekend day for having experts come in and kind of have it be more informal, like a workshop, because I think it's a little bit easier to listen to presentations than it is to deliberate for that length of time. So we may find out throughout the process, hey, in this topic, we really want to dive deeper into a particular idea, like you were mentioning, different things around sustainability, and then we could maybe bring in a speaker and schedule a Saturday.
That's true, and we could videotape it, so if people weren't available, they could always watch the video. It could be
and that way it's like a little bit more informal. You can ask questions, and it's a way to maybe have a happy medium. But we could start doing those as we're getting into the material and things are sparking the need for maybe an expert, and if multiple council members think that particular session would be really beneficial for them, then maybe that's something that we could coordinate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. It takes a lot more energy to study the material, and then start to put together your thought process, as opposed to, okay, here this person who is an expert on climate change, I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen. I'm going to learn. I'm not there to really to challenge this person. I'm here just to take in information, and I think that would be very, very helpful and not so taxing on us.
And that way we could probably still keep it within
the
time frame if we're just adding
that we've laid out.
Okay.
So I just want to make a comment that while I wanted to be open to the rest of the council members' schedules, I've tried to put down as many days that were inconvenient or not. But even during deliberations, I think there is a learning curve that's going to be going on. The discussion is going to open up things that we're going to want to look at. We're going to want to research. We're going to want to look back at what we've done, what we've learned, challenge our citizens, challenge ourselves, challenge the staff. So I don't want to try to overly condense and give ourselves less time to do some of the research, because frankly, yes, I took on this job, but I have another job and I have a personal life, and we all need that, and we all need some of our downtime. So I will go along with what you guys need to do, but I won't go along with overscheduling and making it where we can't do the right thing by this project.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I mean, nobody's proposed weekend dates for me. I'm happy with that. But knowing that I'm having back-to-back meetings night after night after night, which means maybe one night at home in the evenings, that's really difficult when, I'm up till 12 or 1 or 2 in the morning reading the materials.
Well, I think the doodle that went out wasn't intended for us to be all those nights.
No, I know.
It was just
and
like,
that's
okay,
why
what's available for everybody,
and that is why
and then we'll plan the schedule appropriately.
And that is why I put down most of those days I was available. But I'm not planning to be here all those days.
Oh, no.
And I did have a question for staff during deliberations. If a council member was absent during deliberations, is that a big issue?
I don't know. You asking the attorney that or us?
I'm asking staff. I know that it would be important to be here, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't be here.
I know that.
But if an illness or something came up, is that deliberation process something that would pose an issue?
Just probably
Except the
other four
Right.
people
I
get to
think
talk longer.
The attorney.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be a showstopper, Terry.
Well, obviously, you, as you all know, you need a quorum to meet. There's no particular, legal requirement that you have a full council to deliberate. So I think it would really be up to the council and the individual members. I think obviously it's helpful, but not required.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that.
Yeah, we do have the videotape, so it would be best if someone, if you can't be there, that you go back and review it. But I would hope that all the council members would be present when we're actually voting on it.
Yeah, I would think if there was a council member, say, a couple of days or even a day before and you couldn't make it, that we probably just cancel the meeting. But if it was like, okay, we're all here, where's, so-and-so, then of course we'd just continue on with the meeting.
No, and I'm not trying to set us up for this at all. I just didn't know if during deliberations there was any special requirement that would open us up for legal issues if one of us wasn't here during deliberations when we are sharing our ideas. And because, I've got a lot of comments that aren't in the question and answer period because they're my opinions or my presumptions on the material I've read. Mm-hmm. And so these aren't things that we've been airing during these meetings. So I think it's important that we have the time to do the feedback and deliberations where, we're going to be getting input from each other on our ideas or pathways that we find acceptable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like the consensus is, we'll have this schedule, and if people want to have these, speaker, a speaker series essentially, or a couple of sessions where we have workshops with speakers, then I would suggest that you email the topics to Clay, and he can then look into hiring or
maybe we could just do them like we might realize as we go on what would be beneficial to hear from an expert on, and maybe it could be something that is optional if it's because we did that one where we did the One Planet Living workshop, and that ended up being optional and only a few of us went. So, and if it's, I assume they would be recorded. So let's say, maybe Terry couldn't make it one day or one of us couldn't make it, then we could always review it on tape since nothing's really being deliberated upon and it's not a hearing like this. But these are just some ideas I'm throwing out that we could try and make it easier on everybody else. And it sounds like the priority right now would be to schedule for weekdays, evenings,
right,
with an occasional weekend type workshop style as needed, right?
Right. I think it would be exactly like that One Planet Living workshop where it's noticed as a council meeting so that we can all be present. But, there's no expectation that we are required to attend or, we wouldn't be speaking. I would introduce whoever I or whoever else is present, if I'm not there, would introduce the speaker, and then the speaker would lead the meeting.
Right.
It wouldn't be our meeting.
Just to help with...
It sounds like a plane going over there.
Yeah. Just to help with scheduling, I think it would be beneficial for council members to provide information of who they liked or what topics they'd like to have staff reach out to certain folks because, there might be that excellent person and we waited a little bit too long and now they're busy. So, I like your recommendation, Madam Mayor.
And then, I don't know if there's going to have to be like a budget item for this, if the speakers would require a fee or, that's something I guess you'll have to look into. Everything has an impact or a cost. Okay.
Figure it out, Clay.
So moving on to written communications. So I'm going to acknowledge receipt of the written communications that we've received regarding the Brisbane Baylands project. Between March 17th and April 6th, we received written correspondence from Linda Detmer on March 16th, Universal Paragon Corporation on March 16th, Bill Detmer on March 16th, Danny Ames on March 24th, and Kevin Burke on April 4th. Okay, and we are at the end of our agenda, so I'll take a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.